The moment I walked into that house, I knew something had shifted. It wasn't the kind of shift you notice at first glance, but one you feel deep in your bones. The air was different. The house that once felt like home now seemed cold, distant. As I set my bag down, I could hear her, Maggie, moving about upstairs. I had no idea what was waiting for me. No idea that this day would mark the end of everything we had built. I walked into the living room and froze. There, on the coffee table, were the photos. The same photos I'd seen just moments ago on her phone, plastered across a screen I had no right to view. But once you know something, there's no unknowing it. You can't take it back. There she was. Maggie. Her smile, bright, unburdened, shining at a man who wasn't me. A man I had never met. A man who had taken my place when I wasn't looking. Tom. The name now burned in my mind, echoing louder with each passing second. I tried to breathe, tried to stay calm, but the pressure was unbearable. My thoughts were loud, chaotic. I tried to steady myself. I didn't want to lose control, but how could I not? Everything I had trusted was suddenly shattered. These weren't just photos. These were moments. Real, lived moments. I could see the glint in Maggie's eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't for me. The sound of footsteps above broke my trance. Maggie was coming down. I didn't know if I should hide the photos, pretend I hadn't seen them. But no, it was too late for that. My heart pounded in my chest. I had to confront her. Maggie's footsteps grew louder, and I turned to face her as she stepped into the living room. The look in her eyes, it wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was something else entirely. She looked at me, then at the photos. For a split second, the air between us froze. "I can explain," she said, her voice steady, too steady. But I wasn't ready to listen. I had to know everything. I needed the truth. "How long, Maggie?" I barely managed to ask, my voice shaking, though I could feel the anger rising in me. Her silence spoke volumes. I stared at her, waiting for the answer I already knew. But she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. In her eyes, I saw it. The guilt, the betrayal, the years of lies that had piled up between us until we couldn't breathe anymore. The photos, the texts, the messages I had ignored for months, thinking I was imagining things. But I wasn't imagining it. I took a step toward her, my body tense, the heat in my chest rising with each passing second. "How long?" Finally, Maggie spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "A year." That's all she said. The weight of those two words crushed me. I could barely process her words. A year. 1 year of lies. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind? It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. The house, once a symbol of safety and trust, now felt like a cage. And in that cage was someone I didn't recognize. Someone I didn't even know anymore. Not Maggie. Not the woman I had loved for 28 years. "I don't want to hear any more lies," I spat out, my words sharp as they cut through the air between us. "You think I don't know what you've done? You think I don't know about Tom?" Her face fell, her lips trembling as if she were trying to hold back the flood of emotions. But it was too late. The dam had broken, and all that was left was the wreckage. The house. Our life. It was all slipping away, piece by piece. I stood there, staring at her. Every piece of the life we had built, the family we had raised, now felt like a cruel joke. I didn't know if I should scream, if I should hit something, or if I should walk away and never look back. The anger surged, and I felt like I could explode. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, trying to breathe, my heart pounding like a drum. Finally, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not with her. Not with the woman who had shattered everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and trust. I stepped out into the cold night air, feeling like a stranger in my own life. What now? What did I do next? I had no answers. As I stood there, alone in the dark, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on me. It was over. Everything was over. And I couldn't shake the thought that nothing would ever be the same again. Before we continue, we'd like to remind you that 80% of our viewers haven't subscribed yet. Please show your support by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications so you never miss out on our latest content. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to leave a comment below. The weight of that truth settled on me like a thick fog. The air around me felt heavier, as if the world itself was pressing down on me, suffocating me. I stood there, staring at the cold night, unable to move, unable to think. My mind kept replaying the moment, the photos, the admission, Maggie's face, over and over again. But as much as I wanted to hate her, to throw everything we had away in an instant, I couldn't ignore the years of history we had together. I couldn't just pretend those 28 years didn't matter. The love, the laughter, the struggles, they were all still there, lingering in the back of my mind, pulling me in 1,000 directions. They had shaped me, shaped us. So how had it come to this? I walked aimlessly, my thoughts spinning. I found myself in the park near our house, the one we used to walk through together when the kids were younger. I remember how much Maggie loved it. We'd stroll along the paths, talking about everything and nothing at all. It was simple then, before all the noise, before the distractions, before life got in the way. Back then, things were different. I remember the early days of our relationship like it was yesterday. Maggie and I had met in college. She was the one everyone gravitated toward. The life of the party, always laughing, always smiling. I wasn't one to stand out. I was quieter, reserved, but there was something about her that drew me in, something magnetic. It didn't take long for us to fall in love. Our early years together were filled with dreams. Dreams about our future, about the family we wanted to build, about the life we wanted to create. We talked about kids, about careers, about the places we traveled to. Everything felt possible back then. There was an energy between us that I thought would never fade. When we got married, it felt like the beginning of something incredible. I remember how we laughed at the small things, how we'd fight over silly decisions, like whether to paint the kitchen blue or green. But those little moments became the glue that held us together. It was the simplicity that I cherished. We were building something together. But somewhere along the way, the world changed, and so did we. At first, it was subtle. The little things, like how Maggie stopped staying up late with me to watch our favorite shows, how she started spending more time at work. Then came the trips she took with her friends, and soon, I was barely a part of the conversation. I didn't think much of it at first. Life changes, right? People change. It was easy to dismiss. But the distance grew, and I began to notice. I remember one night in particular, about a year before everything fell apart. I had come home late from work, exhausted from the long hours, only to find Maggie sitting on the couch, texting someone. I didn't think much of it at first. She was always on her phone, always on social media, always plugged in. But something was off that night. I couldn't put my finger on it. She didn't look at me when I came in. She didn't greet me like she usually did. She just sat there, absorbed in the screen in front of her. When I asked her what she was doing, she quickly put the phone down, a little too quickly. "Just catching up on some emails," she said, her voice strained. But I could tell something wasn't right. I should have pressed her then. I should have asked more questions. I should have paid attention to the way her eyes avoided mine, the way she was so quick to change the subject. But I didn't. I trusted her. And I trusted that she would come back to me, like she always had. Over time, the subtle shifts became harder to ignore. Maggie stopped talking about her day. She stopped sharing her thoughts with me like she used to. It wasn't an immediate change, but over time, I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. She wasn't the same woman I had married. She wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with. And I wasn't the same man either. We had both changed, but I didn't know how to fix it. I remember our last vacation together. It had been years since we had gone away, just the two of us. The kids were grown, and we had decided to take a trip to the coast. A weekend getaway. Just us. It was supposed to be a fresh start. We needed it. But even then, I could feel the disconnect. We sat at dinner that night, the sound of waves crashing in the distance, the soft hum of the restaurant around us. And Maggie sat across from me, her eyes distracted, her attention elsewhere. She didn't smile like she used to. She didn't talk about the future or anything that mattered. She just sat there, silent. I asked her if something was wrong, and she shrugged it off. "Just tired," she said. But it wasn't just tired. I could feel it. The space between us growing wider with each passing day. The warmth that had once filled our home had been replaced with an emptiness I couldn't explain. And in that emptiness, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about our relationship. Then, a few months later, Maggie met Tom. She'd talk about him at dinner, how they worked together, how he was always there to help her with projects. She seemed to enjoy his company. She'd even laugh at his jokes, a laughter that sounded different from the one I knew. But I didn't think anything of it. I was busy. Work was demanding. I assumed it was just another one of her friendships, one that would fade like all the others. I didn't know that it wouldn't fade. I didn't know that the laughter, the smiles, would become something more. Something I couldn't see until it was too late. The night I found out was the night everything came crashing down. It wasn't just the photos. It wasn't just the texts. It was the realization that the woman I had spent my life with, who I thought knew me better than anyone else, had betrayed me in a way I couldn't have imagined. But even now, as I walked through the park, I couldn't help but wonder, where did it go wrong? Was it me? Was it her? Was it the life we built, or the way we stopped fighting for it? I thought I had known her. I thought I had known everything about our marriage. But the truth, the painful, ugly truth, was that I had never truly seen her at all. And now, as I stood in the quiet park, my heart broken by the weight of those lost years, I realized that I had never truly known myself either. The man I thought I was, the husband, the father, the partner, I wasn't sure where he had gone. I wasn't sure when I had stopped seeing the signs, when I had stopped paying attention. But I knew now, in this crushing silence, that the truth had been slipping through my fingers for far too long. I walked aimlessly, the stillness of the night wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. My mind raced, but no matter how hard I tried to calm it, it kept returning to the same questions. How did I miss this? Why did I ignore the warning signs? The pieces of the puzzle, so obvious now, had been right in front of me. Tom. I remember the first time Maggie had mentioned him. It was a casual comment, something along the lines of how he had been a big help at work. I brushed it off. I didn't think much of it. She had always been surrounded by people, always had someone to talk to. But now, I could hear her voice in my mind. The tone when she spoke of him, the way her eyes would light up when she mentioned his name. That wasn't the way she talked about anyone else. And I had noticed it before. I just didn't want to admit what it meant. I turned a corner in the park, the crunch of gravel under my shoes loud in the quiet. The night was cold, the air biting at my skin. It felt like I was the only one left in the world. It was then that I remembered the late nights. The nights when Maggie would come home, her eyes red, her hair disheveled. She'd always have an excuse. Work was stressful. Had to stay late for a project. A colleague needed help. But how many times had I let it slide? How many times had I told myself, she's just tired. She'll be fine? I hadn't pressed her. I hadn't questioned her. I hadn't wanted to know the truth. The truth that was so damn obvious now. Every late-night meeting. Every unexplained phone call. Every time she left the room quickly when I entered. I had told myself it was nothing. That she was just busy, or tired, or focused on work. And when she had pulled away, I had accepted it, told myself it was just a phase. But now, I knew better. The more I thought about it, the more I began to see the cracks that had formed between us. The subtle shifts in our interactions, the moments I had dismissed as insignificant. It was like a slow leak, unnoticed at first, but now the flood had come. How had we gone from two people in love to two people living in the same house, strangers in the same bed? How had we allowed ourselves to drift so far apart? The guilt gnawed at me, eating away at what was left of my pride. Had I not fought hard enough? Had I stopped caring? Had I let her slip away without even realizing it? I remember the first time I asked Maggie about Tom. It wasn't a direct question, more of an offhand comment. I asked her how her day had gone, and she mentioned that Tom had been particularly helpful with a presentation she was working on. It was an innocent enough remark, but something about it stuck with me. The way she had paused before answering. The way she hesitated, like she was choosing her words carefully. But I didn't press. I didn't ask anything further. And for that, I blamed myself. Every time she came home late after working with him, I felt something tighten in my chest, something I couldn't ignore, but I never asked. I didn't want to confront the possibility, the idea that she was choosing him over me. And now, here I was, pacing in the park, my mind running wild with the images of their secret moments, the ones I hadn't seen, the ones I didn't want to believe. And then there was her phone. I hadn't thought much of it when she started leaving it face down, or when she'd suddenly put it away when I entered the room. The excuses were always simple. It's just work emails. Just texting a friend. But I should have paid closer attention. I should have known that the way she looked at it, the way her hand would tremble just slightly when I was near, meant something else entirely. I remember one evening, not long before everything fell apart. I had come home early for once, hoping to surprise Maggie with dinner. I thought maybe we could rekindle something, spark the connection we had lost. But when I walked in, she was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in her hand, her face flushed. I asked her what was going on, but she quickly hid the phone behind her, her eyes avoiding mine. "It's nothing," she said quickly, but her voice didn't sound right. It sounded forced. "Just a friend." I should have pressed her then. I should have pushed for answers. But I didn't. I let it slide. And now I was paying for that mistake. I stopped walking for a moment, standing still in the park. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The wind cut through the trees, sending a chill through my bones. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow allowed this to happen, that I had let the relationship crumble without realizing it. I thought about Maggie's reaction when I confronted her earlier. How calm she had been. Too calm. I had expected anger, tears, frustration. But instead, there had been a hollow resignation in her eyes. It was as if she had known this moment was coming. She didn't beg me to stay. She didn't try to explain herself. All she said was, "I'm sorry, Daniel. I never wanted to hurt you." Her apology meant nothing now. It was just words. Empty, meaningless words. The damage was done. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder. Had she been in this affair for longer than I realized? Had she started this relationship with Tom long before I even knew he existed? The more I replayed it, the more I questioned every interaction, every glance, every moment we had shared. I began to see things I hadn't seen before. The way she had smiled differently when she spoke about him. The way she had stopped wearing the necklace I gave her for our anniversary, the one she used to wear every day. It was all right there in front of me, but I had been too blind to notice. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The betrayal hurt more than I had imagined. But what hurt even more was the realization that I had allowed myself to be deceived for so long. I had trusted her. I had believed in us. But now, as the reality settled in, I couldn't help but ask, where did we go wrong? Where had everything changed? I replayed every moment in my mind, each interaction, each time I tried to ignore the growing distance between us. And now, all of that was coming to a head. My chest tightened with rage, but also a deep sense of betrayal. How could she do this to me? How could she, Maggie, the woman I had trusted more than anyone, do this? I couldn't stay out here in the dark, not with all these thoughts racing through my head. So, I headed home. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't just leave things the way they were. Not after everything. Not after the truth had come crashing down on me, shattering everything I thought I knew. As I walked into the house, I could feel the weight of the silence. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Maggie was sitting in the living room when I entered. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, or maybe just from the guilt that was clearly written all over her. She didn't say anything when I walked in, but I could feel her eyes following me as I moved through the room. She knew what was coming. I had nothing left to say, nothing left to hold back. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at her, trying to keep my anger in check. But it was impossible. I felt it surge through me, boiling over, pushing everything else aside. The lies, the betrayal, the way she had taken everything from me. Everything. She had destroyed my trust, my love for her, and she had done it with someone else. With him. How long? I demanded, my voice low but furious. How long have you been lying to me? How long has it been going on? Maggie looked down, her hands twisting in her lap, avoiding my gaze. I didn't mean for it to happen, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't want her excuses. I didn't want her apology. I wanted answers. I needed her to face me, to face what she had done. How long? I repeated, my voice rising. She flinched, but she didn't answer. Instead, she just sat there, like she was waiting for me to make the next move. And that's when it hit me. The years of lies, the years of pretending everything was okay, the years of feeling like a fool for trusting her. All of it came crashing down on me in that moment. I had given her everything, and she had given me nothing in return. Nothing but empty words. Nothing but lies. I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped. Answer me. I shouted, my voice breaking the stillness of the room. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, trembling with the fury that was rapidly overtaking my sense of reason. Every ounce of control I had left was slipping away. Maggie's eyes widened, and for the first time in a long time, I saw fear. But it wasn't fear of what I was saying. It was fear of what I might do next. She knew me. She knew how far I could go when pushed. But this was different. This was a betrayal that cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. I took a step toward her, my body rigid with anger. I want you to look at me when I speak to you, I spat. I want you to see what you've done. You think you can just throw everything away like it doesn't matter? Like I don't matter? All these years, all this time, and you think you can just throw me aside? Her lips trembled as she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. I didn't want to hear them. I didn't want to hear her apologize, to hear her explain. Nothing she could say would fix this. Nothing she could say would make it better. With one final step, I reached the table where the photos were still scattered, the same photos that had torn my world apart. I grabbed them, slammed them down in front of her. This is what you've done, I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning through me. This is what you've chosen over everything we had. Maggie flinched at the sight of the photos. She looked at me, her face a mixture of fear, regret, and something else I couldn't place. I saw her lips moving, but the words didn't reach me. They were nothing but empty noise, meaningless. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. I didn't know how I was supposed to feel, but what I felt in that moment was overwhelming. The anger, the betrayal, it had consumed me, and I couldn't stop it. I felt my hands begin to shake, and I looked around the room, searching for something. I don't even know what I was looking for, but my eyes settled on the vase she kept on the mantel, the one we had bought on our honeymoon, the one she had always loved. And before I even realized what I was doing, I had grabbed it and smashed it against the wall. The sound of shattering glass was deafening. Maggie gasped, her body recoiling as the shards scattered across the floor. She backed away, her hands raised in a defensive gesture, but I didn't stop. I was beyond stopping now. I gave you everything, I snarled, my voice a mixture of grief and fury. And this is what you give me in return? I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't stand to see the woman who had once been my partner in everything, now reduced to a stranger who had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. My chest tightened, and I turned away, fighting back the tears that threatened to come. But Maggie didn't leave. She didn't run. Instead, she took a hesitant step toward me, her voice shaky. "Please, Daniel," she whispered. "Please, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't want her apologies. I didn't want her words." It was too late. Without a word, I stormed out of the room, leaving her behind. I didn't care anymore. Nothing mattered. Not the years we had spent together. Not the love I had once believed we shared. It was all gone. She had taken it, ripped it out of my hands, and thrown it all away. As I walked out of the house and into the night, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. The rage had consumed me, but now there was nothing left. No anger, no hatred, just a hollow ache that spread through my chest, filling every corner of my mind. It was over. It had all been for nothing. I kept repeating those words in my head as I walked away from the house, the silence of the night pressing in on me. Every step I took felt like I was walking further into a void, a place where the weight of everything I had built with Maggie no longer mattered. All the years of laughter, the shared dreams, the plans for our future, they meant nothing now. It was as if they had been erased in an instant, wiped away by one cruel betrayal. The rage I had felt only moments ago was already beginning to fade, leaving behind an emptiness that felt so much worse. I was hollow, completely hollow. It wasn't the anger that hurt most. It was the realization that I had trusted her, that I had given her my everything, and she had given me nothing but lies in return. I didn't know where I was going, but I kept walking. The cool night air bit at my skin, but it couldn't numb the pain in my chest. The anger had burned itself out, and now all I was left with was a kind of numbness. A numbness that didn't feel like relief, but like something far worse. It was like I had been stripped of everything. My trust, my love, my belief in the woman I had shared my life with. Gone. In a matter of seconds. By the time I reached the edge of the city, the gravity of the situation finally hit me. I had left her behind, but I couldn't shake the thought of what I had done, what I had become, what she had made me become. I had turned into someone I didn't recognize. A man who had been so consumed by betrayal that he had shattered the very foundation of the relationship he had once fought so hard to protect. I had crossed a line. I had done something that, deep down, I knew I couldn't take back. But it wasn't just the destruction of our home, our trust. It was the fact that I couldn't see a way forward. I couldn't see how we could come back from this. I couldn't imagine a world where Maggie and I would ever be able to rebuild what we had lost. All of it had been shattered, like glass, and the shards were scattered too far apart for me to put them back together. I didn't even know how I ended up at that bar. The dim lighting, the stale smell of beer and cigarettes in the air. I ordered a drink, though I barely tasted it. The bartender gave me a strange look, but I didn't care. I wasn't there to talk. I wasn't there for anything but the quiet. The numbness that came with drowning out the thoughts, the feelings, the devastation. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I kept replaying the argument. The shattered vase, the photos, Maggie's face, pale with fear, but also with a strange sense of resignation. It was almost as if she knew this day was coming, almost as if she had been waiting for it. Was it guilt? Or was it something else? Was she relieved that the truth had finally come out? Or was she just tired of pretending? I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't understand her anymore. The bartender slid a napkin toward me, and I stared at it for a long time. The words, "What are you going to do next?" written on it. It was a simple question, but it felt like the weight of 1,000 decisions, all rushing at me at once. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how to pick up the pieces. How could I even look at her again? How could I ever forgive her for this? How could I go back to the woman who had broken me? The sound of my phone vibrating on the table broke my thoughts. It was a text from Maggie. Just one line. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. Apology? Explanation? I didn't know what she could possibly say that would make a difference now. What could she say to undo the damage that had already been done? I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I tossed my phone back in my pocket and stood up from the bar. The doors slammed shut behind me, and I stepped back into the cool night air, the weight of the world still pressing down on me. The city was quiet now, the streets empty and still. I walked aimlessly for hours, trying to clear my mind, trying to find some sense of peace in the midst of this chaos. But there was no peace to be found, only the constant echo of Maggie's face in my mind, her apology, her words, her silence. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at me when I confronted her, the way she hadn't fought back, the way she hadn't tried to explain herself, the way she had just given up. She had given up on me, on us. Maybe that's what hurt the most, that she hadn't even tried, that she had already made her choice. And it wasn't me. The sun was starting to rise by the time I found myself back at the house. It loomed in front of me like a ghost, empty and silent. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to face the wreckage that had been left behind. But I had nowhere else to go. I had nothing left. I opened the door slowly, the familiar creak of the hinges almost mocking me as I stepped inside. The house was still, just like it had been when I left. But everything was different now. The memories, the laughter, the conversations, the plans we had made. Everything was tainted. Everything had been poisoned. Maggie wasn't there. She had left, as I suspected she would. She hadn't even stayed to try and fix things. It was over. And as I stood there, staring at the empty house, the reality of it all sank in. The life we had built was gone. The love I had thought was unshakable had been torn apart. And I was left standing in the ruins, with nothing but the quiet sound of my own breath to fill the emptiness. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know where to go or what to do. But what I did know was that the man I had been before, the man I had thought I was gone. And nothing would ever be the same again. I had thought that maybe, just maybe, things could return to normal. That the world I knew, the world Maggie and I had built together, could somehow be repaired. But now, I realized that was a lie I had been telling myself. There was no going back. The past was gone. There was no salvaging what had been broken. No amount of apologies, no amount of explanations could undo the damage that had been done. The house felt emptier than ever now. I hadn't realized how much she had filled the space, how much of my life had revolved around her presence, until that moment. The silence was suffocating. I would wake up in the morning, stare at the empty side of the bed, and wonder who I had become. I no longer knew what to do with myself. What was I supposed to do now that everything had fallen apart? But as the days went on, something inside me started to shift. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to see a glimmer of something new. It wasn't hope at first, not exactly. It was more like a small spark of realization. I had spent so much time focused on what had been lost that I hadn't considered what could be gained. The pain was still there, lingering in the background, but with it came the understanding that I wasn't defined by what Maggie had done to me. I wasn't defined by my betrayal or my broken marriage. It wasn't easy to accept that. I had to learn to sit with the discomfort, to face the loneliness, to admit that I was scared. But with each passing day, I felt myself growing stronger. The quiet began to feel less suffocating. It was as if I had been living someone else's life all these years, and now I had the chance to create my own. One where I wasn't holding on to something that was never mine to keep. I began to spend more time with old friends, people I had pushed aside over the years because I was too focused on my marriage. I reconnected with a few of my coworkers, people who had once made me laugh, who had reminded me of the man I used to be. Slowly, I began to remember parts of myself that had been buried for too long. I started taking long walks, the kind I hadn't taken since I was younger, before life had gotten so complicated. I'd go to the park, sit on the benches, and just breathe. For the first time in months, I could feel myself becoming present again, aware of the world around me, the little things that had once brought me peace. The sound of the wind in the trees, the laughter of children playing, the warmth of the sun on my face. It all reminded me that life went on, even when it felt like it was falling apart. One afternoon, I decided to visit my daughter, Sophia. She had been staying with her mother for a few weeks after everything had happened. I hadn't seen her since the night I left, and I wasn't sure what to expect. But when I walked into her apartment and saw her face, her bright smile as she hugged me tight, I knew that, in some small way, everything would be okay. Sophia had always been my anchor, even when I didn't deserve it. She was the one thing in my life that still made sense. And holding her in my arms, feeling her warmth, I realized that the love we shared was something I would never lose. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked, her voice soft, almost tentative. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in a long while. She was growing up fast, too fast. But in that moment, I saw the woman she was becoming, the person who had already started to make her own way in the world. I wasn't done being her father. I wasn't done being someone. I wasn't done with life. "I'm getting there, honey," I said, my voice steady. "It's been a rough road, but I'll figure it out. I'm going to be okay. And so are you." It felt good to say that, to mean it. That afternoon, as I sat with Sophia, talking about everything and nothing, I realized something important. I didn't need Maggie's forgiveness. I didn't need her to fix what was broken between us. I needed to forgive myself. I needed to let go of the guilt I had been carrying for far too long. The guilt that I had somehow failed her, failed our family. The guilt that I wasn't enough. But I was. I was enough. And if I could see that, then maybe, just maybe, I could start moving forward. When I left Sophia's place, I didn't feel lighter exactly. The pain of losing Maggie would never completely go away. but I did feel like I had stepped into a new chapter of my life. I wasn't going to let the betrayal define me anymore. It wasn't going to hold me hostage, chain me to a past that was no longer mine. I was free, free to find my own way, free to live my life for me. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of something new. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and orange. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on me. I felt light. I felt open. I felt ready. And as I stood there, on the edge of the city, watching the world come alive around me, I realized that even though everything had changed, it wasn't the end. It was a beginning.